Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I do educational videos on this channel, usually of the esoteric and obscure variety, and usually theories of everything. People who've worked their whole life to put together a grand unified theory of some kind, and got shunned, got persecuted, never got paid, never got any fame, didn't get their ideas out there, and I'm trying to revive some of these people who I feel are valuable. So today is the 149th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson was born back in 1898, died in 1990, and for about 60 years he was doing research and writing on his reciprocal system, which is a theory of everything. That he has books on physics, astrophysics, chemistry, astronomy, metaphysics, economics, and touches on many other subjects. And they're all based on the same theory. So he has one theory which he really puts into two postulates, and he derives his entire theoretical universe from that theory, and then kind of compares it with the results of the legacy scientists. In particular, their empirical measurements and observations, and not so much their theories, but their measurements. Now we're looking at now the basic idea behind Larson's theory is that we live in a universe of motion. The universe is not made out of matter, and it's not made out of energy, but it is most fundamentally made out of motion. Matter and energy are merely just two different kinds of motion. Now, other people have arrived at that same conclusion in the past, but what distinguishes Larson is that he defined motion as the relationship between space and time. Now, we know that to be true about the most basic kind of motion that we see in the real world, which is speed. Speed is space divided by time. 10 miles per hour, or 50 miles per hour, 50 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Time divided by space, or space divided by time. Now, but Larson posits that really every kind of scientific phenomena is a kind of motion, therefore it is a relationship between space and time. This carries with it a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. Hence, the reciprocal system is the name that he used for his system. And also, therefore, the qualities of time and space are identical. They both have 3 or more dimensions. Larson calls this coordinate space and coordinate time. And they both progress in a scalar manner. Time is always getting later and later and later, and therefore too, so space is always getting farther and farther apart, which was observed by the Hubble telescope in the recession of the distant galaxies. All of the distant galaxies are getting further and further apart, and that is a scalar motion, a motion that has a magnitude but no direction. So Larson calls that clock time and clock space. So there's coordinate time and clock time. And then also time and space both come in discrete units. There's no continuity of those. They come in chunks. Although motion itself is progressing. So, and the chunks are very small. So this is a very difficult thing to detect. But theoretically, both space and time come in chunks, and 1 unit, exactly 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light, which is very different from what Einstein is saying, where Einstein is saying that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. Larson is really saying that the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, the neutral point, 1/1. Now, if we go to the area where we have a relation that is 1/2, then we move into the material sector. If we go to a relationship that is 2/1, then we move into what he calls the cosmic sector. This is the sector that moves faster than the speed of light, which is the kind of the inverse universe of the material universe, which is the universe that moves slower than the speed of light, where that's where we're accustomed to living and measuring. But the cosmic universe is more about mental phenomena, life phenomena, and that is where everything moves faster than the speed of light. Okay, that's just quick recap, maybe not so quick, but we're looking at his 1979 book right now called called Nothing But Motion, and this is the first of 3 books that he has in his series called The Structure of the Physical Universe, second edition. This book is mainly on physics and a little bit on organic chemistry. And we are about to start chapter 5, which is called Gravitation. So he's going to kind of derive what gravity is in his system. And I know a lot of people out there may not even believe in gravity at all. That is not necessarily mutually exclusive with Larson's definition. He uses the term gravity because that's what the legacy scientists used. But he could just instead use the term density, or he could use the term finding your level, instead of gravitation. So don't dismiss just because there's 1 or 2 discrepancies. Okay, here's Larson. Gravitation. Another type of motion that is permitted by the postulates and therefore exists in the theoretical universe is rotation. Before rotational motion can take place, however, there must exist some physical object that can rotate. Now, sorry to interrupt right away, but these 2 sentences are under intense scrutiny by the small community that actually follows Dewey Larson's work, especially Dr. Bruce Perrett took these statements to task and wondered why rotational motion can't be just as primary as translatory motion, and therefore that you can have rotational motion without a physical object. And that really is where another one of the Larson's associates, KVK Nehru, decided that the photon was a birotation, not a simple harmonic motion. The simple harmonic motion was a product of it being a birotation. I think that's called the epsilon function from the Leonard Euler, the mathematician. And but so just to say, we're going to let Larson, try to convince us here, but just to say that this idea that right here where he says before rotational motion can take place, there must exist some physical object that can rotate. That is under dispute. Okay. Even though, and Larson says, this is purely a matter of geometry. Unfortunately, Larson's geometry is also under dispute, because in his second postulate, he says that the geometry of the universe is Euclidean. And this, in spite of the fact that I think he knew that the geometry of the universe was not necessarily Euclidean, but that was going to be the kind of the easiest way for people to understand where he's coming from. He didn't want to introduce any of these 19th or 20th century geometries into the system, even though he knew about them. Now, what Perret does is he substitutes in projective geometry for Euclidean geometry. Euclidean geometry is just X, Y, Z coordinates. But projective geometry includes Euclidean geometry as a subset. So when you use projective geometry instead, you still have the Euclidean geometry at your disposal, but you have a whole lot more as well, including affine geometry and metric geometry. Okay, now I promise I'm going to let Larson talk here for a little while. We are still in the stage of the development where we are dealing only with scalar motions, and a single scalar motion cannot produce the directional characteristics of rotation. Like the sine curve of the photon, they require a combination of motions, a compound motion, we may say. Thus, while motion is possible without anything moving, rotation is not possible unless some physical object is available to be rotated. The photon of radiation is such an independent motion or physical object, and it is evident from the limitations that apply to the kinds of motion that are possible at this stage of the development that it is the only primary unit that meets the requirement. Simple rotation is therefore rotation of the photon. In our ordinary experience, rotation is a vectorial motion, and its direction, a vectorial direction, is relative to a fixed spatial system of reference. In the absence of other motion, an object rotating vectorially remains stationary in the fixed system. However, any motion of a photon is a scalar motion, inasmuch as the mechanism required for the production of vectorial motion is not yet available at this stage of the development. A scalar motion has an inherent scalar direction, inward or outward, and it is given a vectorial direction by the manner in which the scalar motion appears in the fixed coordinate system. As brought out last chapter, the net scalar direction of independent motion is inward. The significance of the term net in this statement is that a compound motion may include an outward component, providing that the magnitude of the inward component of that motion is great enough to give the motion as a whole the inward direction. Since the vectorial direction that this inward motion assumes in a fixed reference system is independent of the scalar direction, the motion can take any vectorial direction that is permitted by the geometry of three-dimensional space. One such possibility is rotation. The special characteristic of rotation that distinguishes it from the simple harmonic motion previously considered is that in rotation, the changes in vectorial direction are continuous and uniform. so that the motion is always forward rather than oscillating back and forth. Consequently, there is no reason for any change in scalar direction, and the motion continues in the inward direction irrespective of the vectorial changes. Scalar rotation thus differs from inherently vectorial rotation in that it involves a translational inward movement as well as the purely rotational movement. A rolling motion is a good analogy, although the mechanism is different. The rolling motion is one motion, not a rotation and a translational motion. It is the rotation that carries the rolling object forward translationally. Similarly, the scalar rotation is only one motion, even though it has a translational effect that is absent in the case of vectorial rotation. To illustrate the essential difference between rotation and simple harmonic motion, let us return to the automobile analogy. If the car is on a very narrow road, analogous to the one-dimensional path of vibration of the photon, and it runs forward in moving north, then when it reverses its vectorial direction and moves south, it also reverses its scalar direction and runs backward. But if the car is on a circular track and starts moving forward, it continues moving forward regardless of the changes in vectorial direction that are taking place. The vectorial direction of the inward translational movement of the rotating system, like the vectorial direction of the non-rotating photon, is a result of viewing the motion in the context of an arbitrary reference system, rather than an inherent property of the motion itself. It is therefore determined entirely by chance. However, the non-rotating photon remains in the same absolute location permanently, unless acted upon by some outside agency, and the direction determined at the time of emission is therefore also permanent. The rotating photon, on the other hand, is continually moving from one absolute location to another as it travels back along the line of the progression of the natural reference system. And each time it enters a new absolute location, the vectorial direction is redetermined by the chance process. Inasmuch as all directions are equally probable, the motion is distributed uniformly among all of them in the long run. A rotating photon therefore moves inward toward all space-time locations other than the one it happens to occupy momentarily. Coincidentally, it continues to move outward by reason of the progression of the reference system. But the net motion of the observable aggregates of rotating photons in our immediate environment is inward. The determination of the vectorial direction corresponding to outward automatically determines the vectorial direction of inward in each case, inasmuch as one is the reverse of the other. Some of the readers of the first edition found the concept of inward motion rather difficult. This was probably due to looking at the situation on the basis of a single reference point. Outward from such a point is easily visualized, whereas inward has no meaning under the circumstances. But the non-rotating photon does not merely move outward from the point of emission. It moves outward from all locations in the manner of a spot on the surface of an expanding balloon. Similarly, the rotating photon moves inward toward all locations in the manner of a spot on the surface of a contracting balloon. The outward motion is simply the spatial representation of an increasing scalar magnitude, whereas the inward motion is the spatial representation of a decreasing scalar magnitude. If that decreasing magnitude reaches zero, it continues as an increasing negative magnitude. That is, if the object which was moving inward toward a certain location eventually arrives at that location, it continues in motion beyond that point, providing that nothing intervenes. Okay, now I know all this is very abstract, and you got to really, put your visualization skills to work here. My recommendation is listen to my video over and over again, go over it real slow, like one sentence at a time, and try to visualize what he's talking about, unpack all the different terms that he uses, inward, outward, scalar, translational, rotational, and so on, and you might be able to get it. But the basic idea is that the photon moves outward, but a rotating photon moves inward, and that is the basis of gravitation. We'll dig into this more next time. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.